Thank you so much, Joshua. So we're going to have 3 respondents. Each one will be a 15-minute presentation, 5-minute Q&A with Joshua. We're going to take the first respondent and have a 20-minute break in case you have to move your cars. So don't worry. So Rachelle Hayes came to Berkeley Covenant in 2011 and is now the youth director, and she'll give the first response. Thanks, Rachelle.
Just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Moritz, Joshua, for your presentation. It was just really thought-provoking and inspirational, and I'm just really grateful for the time and effort you've put into opening this conversation. It's really important. So, yes, as Bob mentioned, I'm the youth director at Berkeley Covenant Church, and so I'm responding today from the context of my work with 6th through 12th graders, ages 11 to 18, and been working with them since 2011, and I became the youth director in 2013. And over the last few years, Joshua and I have been working together in ministry to the youth. And my heart for the youth and the goal for this ministry is that the youth would trust in God and would truly place their confidence in Scripture as the Word of God, and that they would follow Jesus throughout, through their youth, through their college years, and throughout life. So as I think about the youth of today, they really, like Joshua mentioned earlier, they really are the future and the future of the church. So that's why I just think this dialogue is so crucial and exciting, that we can actually address this number one reason why youth are leaving the church, issues of science. So the data that Joshua presented about how important science is to youth is true to my experience in this ministry. They love science, and they really do put confidence in it, no matter how science-minded they are. So to Joshua's question, how important is engaging science in youth ministry? I would say it's vital. And in light of Joshua's research and presentation on the importance of this, I'm really grateful for his passion in Christian formation of our youth and just nurturing lifelong faith in them, and for how his expertise in the intersection of science and faith has really helped our youth in their faith journey. And I just want to say briefly, too, that Joshua has really helped me in my faith journey, too. In college and after I graduated, I had questions about faith and science and how they relate, especially about how God created us. And Joshua has really helped me in my learning and questioning process. And I'm not an academic, and science isn't my strong suit. But going to Joshua's classes at Berkeley Covenant, and also reading his book that he mentioned earlier, and is also over there as a sample for you guys to look at. Science and Religion, Beyond Warfare and Toward Understanding. And that was a really great and accessible starting place for me. And as I've helped Joshua in preparing the youth classes on Sunday for our youth, I've been able to enter more deeply into conversation with them about their exploration of science and faith and how they connect. And that's really what I want to focus on today, how our youth have responded to the ways that we've integrated science in our youth ministry. And I would say that I've seen with all of our youth that, even while the degrees of how science-minded they are, bringing science into dialogue with faith has been such an asset for them all. For example, during youth group a while back, we got into a youth-initiated conversation about free will and some more complicated complicated questions related to philosophy and science came up, and one of our 7th graders exclaimed, "We need Josh." Joshua wasn't there at the time, and she's one of our less science-focused youth, but she could really see the value of science in our dialogue and was aware of how Joshua could have helped in our discussion. And last June, at the end of the year, I asked the youth during our reflection, what is something that you learned about God this year? And one of our 8th graders who loves science said, "I learned that the Bible and science really do go together." And that was really important for him. So in thinking about how to keep helping our youth find a way forward, as I think about issues of science and faith, I want to respond to another question Joshua brought up. What are some practical steps to humbly, honestly, responsibly, and prophetically engage science in youth ministry? And so Joshua's 9 steps to engaging science in youth ministry, Leviticus, cleverly put together, have really been an effective model with our youth. So I'll mention how we practice all the steps, but I'll focus specifically on steps 1, 4, and 8, and the results they've had with our youth. So step 1 is the L of Leviticus, listening and learning where your youth are at with regard to questions from science. And each of the youth Sunday classes we've done have started with the act of listening. So by asking the youth what their interests and questions are, we've noticed a difference in their level of engagement and excitement about the classes. They've expressed how happy they felt that their ideas were listened to. And we've also seen that they've been more consistent in coming to class and inviting friends. And even our youth who don't attend our church have come to class and gained a lot from it, saying things like, I really learned something. In our most recent class, we actually very intentionally began with interviewing the youth, each of them, and just asking them, what are your interests? What are your questions about faith? What are your challenges and struggles about life and faith? And so we integrated this mix of interests into a class. The youth had many questions that have a huge scientific component, even if they weren't specifically stated in a scientific way. The overarching theme for the class, which was, again, one of the interests of the youth, is reasons for hope. And just all the challenges we face in our world, how do we have hope? Hope in God, hope in how the Christian faith really makes a difference for the good, and that's a hope worth sharing. And this theme might not sound particularly scientific, but many of the topics actually have a lot to do with science as they're fleshed out in more detail. And so I'll give some examples of that a bit later. But I'll speak briefly a bit to the rest of the steps that come after listening. We noticed that the way some of these questions were phrased had false dichotomies. So that's where step 2 came in, of exposing false dichotomies. Step 3 of viewing doubt as a doorway to deeper faith played a big role, as there's areas of doubt for the youth. How can God be good when there's so much evil in the world? And we had previously in another class spent a lot of time helping the youth to think critically. So that's step 4, which I'll speak about in a moment. And then the materials of the class focused on steps 5 through 8 that Joshua had spoken about, talking about the history of science and philosophy of science and exposing myths. And so at this point, I'd like to say more about step 4, the first I of Leviticus, instructing youth on how to think well or critically, not simply what to think. So in the spring of 2018, Joshua taught one of our youth classes called The Truth Will Set You Free. And the first session was, what is truth? So he spoke briefly about this, but in order to discern what each of the youth see as having the most authority when evaluating truth claims about reality, we each took a litmus test for truth. And this involved ranking 6 criteria for testing truth claims. And if they put number 1, or whatever they put as number 1, was the one most important to them. And we did this individually so we wouldn't influence each other. So the 6 criteria for evaluating truth claims were logical consistency in internal coherence, agreement with science, agreement with scripture, personal experience and meaningfulness, and agreement with cultural norms. And for all of our youth, the criteria of agreement with science ranked number 1. So that was the most important to them, most important for testing truth. And for only one of our youth, an 8th grader, agreement with science and agreement with scripture tied, number 1. So looking at the response of our youth and how they evaluate truth claims, it's clear to see that the cost of ignoring science, is great. Considering that all the youth ranked science number 1, I think to completely ignore science would be to ignore what they give the most authority to. And science not only impacts the youth every day, in school, through entertainment, through media, through technology, but it also influences how they perceive the world. And so science is a major source of truth for them. And this is a big reason why, to answer Joshua's question, what is the cost of ignoring science in youth ministry? It would be devastating for their future faith. And just ignoring or being antagonistic to science would be detrimental to creating an open and honest space where the youth can ask their questions and can share their views and ultimately grow in their faith in God. And I've seen that being open to their questions specifically about science, keeps many of our youth interested in discussions at youth group and youth Sunday class. And for the others who aren't as sciencey, scientific perspectives still matter to them and still an authority in their lives. Now I want to give you some examples of how we've applied step 8, the view of Leviticus, using creative mutual interaction, or CMI, as a method of choice, as we bring faith and scripture into conversation with science. On Wednesday night's forum, Joshua shared the statistic that 26% of Americans view the Bible as a book of fables, legends, myths, and moral precepts that were invented by humans without God for the sake of human agendas, and how only 24% see the Bible as true. But part of what many people question about the Bible are miracles contained within. Yet believing miracles plays an important role in the longevity of faith. And as Joshua wrote in his paper, a very important factor encouraging cognitive resistance and leading to a higher level of religious commitment and practice during emerging adulthood is having believed in divine miracles as a teenager. And this was really eye-opening for me to read. But we were able to address the question of miracles in another session of our spring 2018 class, Are the Miracles of the Bible True? So at the beginning of the class, we asked the youth, do you think the miracles of the Bible are true? And the responses were mixed. Some of them thinking that miracles are just a metaphor, and others saying that they weren't sure how much they believe that these things actually happened. And so we looked at miracles in light of science. We talked about the laws of nature and how scientific facts don't stand still because we don't know all the laws of nature, as Joshua pointed out earlier in his example with the central dogma of molecular biology. So in this class, Joshua explained to the youth that the best laws of nature we have, which come from quantum physics, are based on probability and not on absolute certainty. And so even as we looked at specific examples from scripture, like the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, things that were once thought to be impossible according to science have now been shown to be possible under certain conditions, though highly improbable. So at the end of the class, we asked, do you think the understanding of miracles informed by our discussion of science makes it more believable that the miracles of the Bible actually occurred? And all of the youth affirmed this, and one of them said, oh yeah, absolutely. So it was just a really clear transition that the youth had made by the end of the class. So I just really think that letting science shed light on the Bible has really helped give our youth a more solid foundation on their faith. And getting back to how our most recent class, the one that I was explaining about reasons for hope, and how it has a lot to do with science as it's fleshed out in more detail. Many of the sessions are good examples of using creative mutual interaction. So the youth, one when we interviewed them was race and racism as it relates to the church. And in this session, called The Origins of Race, Racism, and Christ's Healing of the Deep Divisions, we talked on scientific aspects of race and how contemporary genetics underpin the unity of humanity. Also, we looked at how Darwin's evangelical abolitionist roots inspired the scientific quest to prove the common ancestry of humanity and thus fight for the abolition of slavery. And this was something our youth had never learned before. I had never learned that either. And so the youth got to see, and I think we're really encouraged by the role of faith as it relates to science and the things that they really care about. Another session showing the importance of CMI was the reality and importance of free will. Here we talked about lots of science, quantum indeterminism, and how science can't tell us the future. We talked about issues with genetic determinism, worked on in neuroscience, and how science establishes room for free will even at the level of fruit flies. So the science forms the foundation for us to have the theological and ethical discussion about moral accountability and the role of obedience and faith. So what we were trying to get at in this class is, if God asks us for obedience, how is it possible to obey Him if science doesn't allow for free will? And how can we be morally accountable for anything if we can't choose between right or wrong? We did another session on the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen, and why does God allow evil? We talked about the foundations of the cosmos, cosmic fine-tuning, and how life wouldn't be possible if the cosmos was physically different than it is in terms of fundamental laws and properties. And also we looked at Job and how God's asking Job about how evil relates to the foundation of the world is a scientific question. And this got deeper into the question of evil in a way that made sense in the youth's lives. Finally, one more example of CMI is a session we will be doing soon, the Christian founders of modern science. And this session will address step 7, the one about teaching some history of science as it relates to faith. So we'll talk about many of the founders of modern science that Joshua just mentioned, who were devout Christians, like Nicholas of Cusa, Johannes Kepler, Robert Boyle, Nicholas Steno, Max Planck, Gregory Mendel, Theodosius Dobzhansky, and Lisa Meitner. And the point of this class is that these ideas of science really have a whole history embedded in the Christian faith. And our hope is that these youth who love science will see that science is deeply rooted in faith and that their faith becomes more important to them. So as I wrap up, my hope in all this has just been to demonstrate the importance of science in nourishing the faith of the youth both now and for their future. And all of our youth who attend our church or other churches, and even those who aren't believers, have definitely benefited from intentionally talking about science and how it relates to the Christian faith. And this can be seen by just a few more responses I'd like to share from our youth to close. One youth recently told us that if our church didn't support science, she would leave. And she said, if I went to a church that said you couldn't believe in evolution, I'd say, what is this, some kind of joke? And in a recent conversation with our youth, we asked them, do you think you'd still go to youth group if we were anti-science? And one of our youth said, it would put a strain on things. And another said, I would avoid discussing anything.
No offense.
So, another said, I wouldn't listen to anything you guys had to say about scripture, no offense. Another youth summed up the conversation like this. It sounds like the overwhelming answer is all respect gone. But the good news is these youth are all there, and by their own testimony, science has played a big role in keeping them there. Lastly, something hopeful is the journey of one of our high school seniors. She shared with us during her sophomore year that she had always felt that she had to choose between God and science. But through our conversations with her and our classes, she felt relieved to find out that she didn't have to compromise her love for God or science. And now she's pursuing a career in science and looking for churches as she prepares to go to college. So there is hope for the faith of our youth today. But bringing that hope to fruition involves engaging honestly and humbly with science. So I wanted to invite up Ariel, one of our youth who's here, and Ariel. So Ariel has been in our youth group since like her 6th grade year. So yeah, I thought she could share a little bit about her thoughts on how we've incorporated science in our youth ministry.
Yeah, so I always thought that I would have to choose between science and religion also. And I was going to choose science because there was evidence for it. And I just overall thought it was the right direction. And so I was just thinking about leaving the Christian faith because science was so important to me. And I always thought that the Bible just said the exact opposite of what science said. And then I met Josh, and I started talking with him and just going to his classes and just going to when he would preach, and it was just always so interesting to me. And then I realized that the two could connect, and it just made my faith so much stronger because now I realize that the Bible is not saying that science isn't true, and science isn't saying that the Bible isn't true. And I think they both go together. And instead of making my faith less, it's overall just made it way stronger. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Ariel. Thanks, everyone.
You want to make a quick comment?
Yes, thank you, Rachelle, for sharing. I think I was trying to think if there's anything to add, and I really don't have anything to add or anything to respond. There's a lot of dovetailing in terms of application and theoretical. Maybe I'll just maybe we can just go straight to questions if that's okay. Just open some more.
So we're going to have 2 other respondents in the panel, and then questions all around.
Yeah.
So I think
Are we not doing questions now?
no, just between you.
Okay, just
This is a good time for it. Let's take a 20-minute break. It's probably need to move your car and get a refreshment. And we'll come back at 3:25. Okay, 3:25. Thank you.